Welcome back, word students. Welcome back. I don't know why I can't just say that quickly. Anyhow, it's nice to see you kind of in my heart. Today we are going to be going over the words that are covered in chapter 5 of our textbook. So this would be our kind of second series of lectures in module 2. This is another lecture in which we're basically there's not a lot of big new concepts being introduced. We're just kind of introducing a whole bunch of big important words into our vocabulary, which is great. But we do have a couple of bigger concepts to talk about, and the big one of those is incipient verbs. That's kind of what this chapter chooses to focus its kind of theoretical eye on is incipient verbs, which gives us a chance to talk about the verb incipio in Latin. So in the last series of lectures, the lectures on chapter 4, we learned the verb capio, capere, which means to seize. And the word incipient came up in that context. And I said at the time, let's not worry about incipio, incipient now, because it's not actually related. So this is the time we get to talk about incipio, which is all over English. So though technically incipio is related to capio, and it would mean something like to seize for. What it comes to mean, even in Latin, is to begin. It doesn't have any sense of taking in Latin. And so incipio just means to begin. And so all of the derivatives of incipio have more of a sense of beginning than of seizing. So incipient, this word here, is coming from the present participle, because this is one of the verbs that has an I in the stem. And so an incipient, anything that's incipient is beginning. And so inceptive is an adjective created from this word, and inception is the noun created from this, which has this word has taken on many different valences in English. I've seen inception. I couldn't tell you. Maybe I think it's the idea that the beginning of any action is in your head, and so by planting dreams and ideas in people's heads, they're beginning bigger actions. Like that would be my analysis, but it's been many years since I've seen that movie, even though I know Christopher Nolan. I mean, he's amazing. It's a good movie, but what the inception is was a little bit hard to nail down. But so incipio and all of its related English words have a sense of beginning rather than ceasing. So as a result, in this chapter, we are learning inceptive verbs. And these are verbs that have an SC in the middle of them. And that SC is like, it's not a suffix, it's not a prefix, it's just like an addition to the word that indicates, I guess you could almost say it's a suffix because it comes in between a verb. So candor or flor or ira, it comes between a word, I guess those are all nouns, and then the verb ending, and it indicates to begin. It's really important to distinguish this SC from the SC in the word skio, which we learned in the last chapter. This SC has nothing to do with knowledge or knowing. It's not the SC in science. It's completely different. But we do see it in English a bunch. So adolescere means to begin to mature. Adolesce being a noun meaning mature. So we have adolescence. So adolescence is the period that you're beginning to mature technically. So cando or candor, or we're going to see later, different words related to this means to heat. And so when you add the SC to it, you get candescence, which means to begin to glow, which leads to words like incandescence, which is it's a process of glowing, or incandescent is beginning to glow theoretically, technically. So fluorescence with that SC in the middle means begin to blossom. So there is this English word fluorescence, but I want to make sure that is blossom spelled right? I'll check it. Anyhow, this is different though than like fluorescent lighting. At least they sound exactly the same, especially the way I say them. I'm sure some people could bring out this U here, fluorescence. I don't think that's how we say it, right? We say fluorescent. But this, which is the color, which is the light, fluorescence, that is coming from a completely different word than fluorescence. So this is actually coming from a Latin word meaning to flow. And I think it has something to do with the way the light flows in. So those are different. Those are different things. So yeah, if you mess that up, that'd be very embarrassing for you. Okay, so iraski, this is a verb with an I infinitive coming from a noun, ira, which means anger, which we're learning. So this means to begin to come angry, begin to become angry. We don't have a lot of words related to Iraski in English, but there is this word irascible, which means able to begin to become angry. I mean, we would just use it as basically angry all of the time, but that is possible. Obsolescere, this is almost the exact same word as adolescere, but we just have different prefixes, ad here, ob here. So, but this is the opposite. If adolescence is begin to mature, obsolescence is begin to wear out, right? And we are, I think, in our current moment, very familiar with this because we all have devices with built-in obsolescence. Like that's the constant joke, right? Like I've had my iPad for 5 years, and I was like, well, it's probably time because of a built-in obsolescence. So that's that word. And then Wellescere. So we learned, oh, we're learning in this chapter, Wale, which means to be strong. Wellescere means to begin to gain strength. And this is where we get words like convalescence or convalescent. A convalescent home is where you begin to get stronger, right? It's um, theoretically, that's what it's for. So those are inceptive verbs, verbs that within them have these two letters, SC, that indicate not a total process, but the beginning of a process. And so there you have it. Pretty exciting. Okay, so that's it. That's it for theory today. Now we're going to go on and look at a bunch of the stems because there's some really good ones. Many of them are kind of one-offs, like we're just learning a few words related, but I think on the whole, it will ultimately be illuminating. So the first word in our STEM vocabulary is adolescere, and also, I mean, this may be interesting to some of us. So adolescere is a verb meaning to beginning to mature. Adultus is the perfect passive participle. So someone who is an adult has gone through the process of beginning to mature. Adolescere, to begin to mature. Adultus, having begun. Having basically means having matured. So you're an adult. And so our stems here would be adolesque or adult, leading to words like adolescence and adult. So there's not too many other ones out there, but good to know. Good to know what these words mean. Okay, so here's this was the word related to Kalesko, right? Kalesko? No, I think you can never mind. Forget I said anything. Calera is a verb meaning to be warm. So the stem is cal. Now, the one that I always think is very interesting from this is calorie, because we're Americans and we're constantly watching our calories. And technically, a calorie is a unit of measurement. It's how much energy is needed to heat something a certain degree. Now, some of you are going to be good at science and good at, nutrition science, and you will know much better that definition. But basically, all I can ever remember is that a calorie is a unit of energy associated with heat. And so that's where we get the word. But as our book talks, our book has like a whole paragraph about this word, which I think is very interesting. The upshot is that the word cauldron, which is that kind of, big like pot that you see like witches' cauldrons, that comes from calorie through the French. And chowder comes from the same word, but it comes through Canada as well. So it's like you get the French word, and then Canadians pick it up and they turn it into the word chowder. So that also is related to warm. And then caldera is, I don't know, some of you may have seen recently that in Carlsbad we have our own little volcano up there, but I don't think it has this feature. But if you think of like Mount St. Helens or whatever, so it's like a mountain, right? But then there's like a little dip at the top where the top blew off and then settled again. That's the caldera. So I guess how you call that a geography? Is that a geography term or some sort of like, I don't know, like geology? I think that's what I'm thinking of, geology term. And then chauffeur, I love because that also chauffeur is clearly related to like chowder. These are kind of the same sh sounds. But a chauffeur comes from this word, and our book speculates, and I think this makes a lot of sense. Your chauffeur isn't just the person who drives you around, but the person who warms up the car, right? So that's probably where that came from. But anyhow, just random. So that's that verb. Here is the word I was thinking of. So we talked about incandescent earlier. That is the inceptive version of candora, which is just a normal, straight up version verb, meaning to glow or to shine. And so the stem here is canned, and obviously candle comes from this. Candle is something that glows. So candid, we're going to talk about the suffix id at the end of this lecture, but candid means that you're glowing, that you're shining. Like that's the original sense, but it comes to mean honest. And another thing that is really interesting, and the book again goes on at this at length, so if you're interested, you could talk about it. The word candidate comes from this because in Latin, and this is just something that still needs some work theoretically in terms of classics people, but it's a really interesting kind of journey. So think of candid, that means honest. So in ancient Rome, someone who is honest, someone who is open, sorry, candid means to glow or to shine. So someone's glowing or shining is someone wearing white. Like that color was associated with glowing and shining. And a candidate in running for office in ancient Rome wore a white toga. So the reason a candidate is called a candidate is because they're wearing white, and the color white was associated with glowing and shining. And so there's this whole color theory going on here that still needs a lot of work. But it's really interesting. And if you're interested in classics, this is something I can talk about at length. But for our purposes, what you should know is that candidate comes from the word for white because white was associated with glowing. That's kind of a much more straightforward journey. There. Incandescent, we talked about, so candelabra, the thing that holds up candles, comes from this, and then chandelier is basically the same idea as candelabra, but it's coming through the French, and it's obviously a different candle holder. But chandeliers used to just hold candles, so it's crazy, a lot of fires. But okay, so that's Candra. This guy, Caro Carnes. Now, there's a famous writer named Robert Caro who's worked on a um, long series of biographies about Lyndon B. Johnson, which I've been trying to read for my whole life. But anyhow, that's the nominative form of this noun. Carnus is the genitive form. And so this is the third declension noun. So we obviously use carn to get our stem. So this is the word meaning flesh. And so as a result, we get a lot of different kind of words from this. So chili con carne is what the one our book focuses on. That's chili with meat, with flesh, if you want to go in that direction, I guess as opposed to just beans. So that's like one direction that carne goes, right? But then also we have carnal. So carnal, I think there's a movie called Carnal Affairs from the 80s. It's a very popular word in the 80s. But carnal was picked up in distinction. So carnal is things of the flesh, and it's picked up as in distinction to like things of the spirit, things of the soul. So it has kind of, I would say, it has kind of a negative connotation just by association with kind of a more religious interpretation. But anyhow, so that's carnal. I do think there's something called carnal sin, sins of the flesh. So you can correct me on that if I'm wrong. An incarnation is like an idea put into a body or something put into a body. You often hear like in her current incarnation. So I don't know if that means, yeah, but it's an idea of something that normally exists outside of a body being put into a body for however long period of time. But carnation, the flower carnation, is called carnation not because it's a fleshy flower, but because the color of a carnation is similar to the color of flesh. So I'm actually not familiar enough with carnations to know. I always thought of them as very pink, but maybe that's what the inside of our flesh. So anyhow, but that's how it got the name. They didn't ask me, they didn't consult me, but that's the name. So carnival is actually more closely related to carnal because carnival, this is the celebration before Lent begins. And Lent is a period of time in which you're supposed to abstain from eating flesh. So carnival is this kind of flesh eating party before you don't get to eat flesh for 40 days. Yes, and so that's why I have this mask here. It's Mardi Gras mask. And then carnage, of course, is related, just creation of destruction, the destruction of flesh, probably for carnage. Yeah, so there is that one. And I think no, okay, so this guy is brutal, and I think we're going to be talking about him quite a bit for the rest of this class. So in Latin, there's an amazing verb, facio, and its infinitive form is facere. It has many, many, many prefixes. So ficera is what it turns into with the prefix. And then factus, fact, perfect passive participle, and then factus if you put that perfect passive participle with a prefix. So this verb means to make or to do. And that seems very simple, but there are so many senses of making and doing that this word is just all over English in many different iterations. And I mean, one of the simple ones, I don't even think I included this here. Oh, here it is, fact. This word, fact, that's fact. So a fact technically is something having been done or having been made. That's what makes a fact. That's its original sense. But then we have adjective, but and so it's pretty straightforward, and there's other versions of that, right? Like faction, fact, well, that's not similar, but so there's some simple connections. But many of the connections are kind of really buried in the word. So there's a lot of adjectives that end in ficus, F-I-C-U-S, that is related to this ficera. So that leads to stuff like beneficent, which means someone who is doing good, munificent, someone who is making gifts. And that then we have magnify, which is magna, which means great, and then ify, which means to make. So magnify is to make something great. Facile is coming through another Latin adjective, facilis, but we use facile to mean easy. It might, and if you think of the word difficult, difficult is the stem ficult, which is related to facile, with diff in front of it, which means not easy. So difficult is based off of this particular word, fact, faction. And then infect is from this fact, and it's like to make something inside. So a disease infects you by making itself inside your body, something like this. Confection is made together, defect is made incorrectly. A facsimile is a similar thing made. So fax comes from this fax. So young people, you guys don't know what a fax is. Good for you. That's a blessing. And yeah, but so facsimile. So those are just some of the ways we're going to be seeing many other versions of this. So, but at the end of the day, it's coming from this amazing Latin word, facio. And oh, no, here it is. So here's flos floris. This is just the word meaning flower. We saw it with the inceptive verb floresco. Stem is flor. So here's another instance where we have this new suffix id. So florid is like looks like a flower. So mainly we use the word florid in terms of a florid complexion, which means a blooming like red. Some usually in, I mean, if you read like books from prior to the 90s. Often people who have florid expressions are people who are suffering from alcoholism, and so their skin is very red, where it would normally be white. Or some sort of pale color. So that's florid. But also you hear about florid prose, which is like overly flowery, right? Florid is generally in English, very negative word. And then efflorescence is kind of a blooming, the efflorescence of letters in medieval times or whatever. So that's where that comes from. Okay, so there it is that we are stopping there for the end of lecture one. So please come back for lecture two. We're going to continue to make our way through these stems. I'm going to stop the recording.